Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom. This is a very special swapcast because it's not just Garden of Doom. We're doing a show with David Getzin, and he is the host of Living Process, which is a YouTube show on architecture, but he's here, and it's a swapcast, which means he's also the host just as much as I am. So David, please tell everyone about yourself.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. So my name is David Getzin, and I work with my team in building design, mostly houses, build design and permitting in Pasadena, California, and regionally, remotely across the country for getting good stuff done that ways, and sharing all kinds of random, weird, fun thoughts on architecture, history, and other things on my YouTube channel, Living Process. My Twitter, you can follow me at HistofArch, at HISTOFARCH. And I was very pleasantly happy to hear about Jeff's podcast, and we're going to be talking about some debunking, I believe.
Yeah, it seems so. So this came about, dear audience, the listeners of Garden of Doom. If you've been a long-term listener, you remember that Chris Anderson, that's not exactly how to pronounce his name properly, but that's how he told me to introduce him to the mostly American audience, from the Eastern Border podcast, was on, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago already. And we talked about some Eastern European mythology, myths, legends, and things like that. We were going to do a second show where we were going to do the Anunnaki in Russia, but right as we were scheduling it, a little nasty thing called the ramp up to what became the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine, was going on. And so we decided to put that on hold. And of course, that war is still going 15 months later. Anyway, I heard David on Chris's podcast when he was taking a break from just war coverage and talking about some other stuff, architecture and things like that. And David mentioned some of his hobbies and things that he was interested in. And I'm like, you know what? That gives me an idea. I've had people here on about Tartaria. I've had Cliff Dunning on from Earth Ancients. Love Cliff, love the show. He was on episode 50, I believe. And spoken to a lot of people who have said things that I have no way of fact-checking them. And what I heard was, the ancients have this amazing technology that was either a result of lost technology from an ancient human civilization, or, ancient aliens. Aliens help people build Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat. And more recently, there's Tartaria. Now, anyone who listened 2 months ago to Andrew Goff, and I love Andrew, on Tartaria, you've heard this rather new, at least new to me, and he acknowledged it was sort of new to him as well, theory that there was a mud flood somewhere around 1900, and the proof is in the photos that there's no people and that buildings were built, underground, and you see half exposed windows and things like that. And I'm like, if I only knew an architect who was interested in those types of things, I could ask. I've done the same thing with Mars and the moon with scientists, and I've also invited a flat earther on. They've been avoiding me, and then I'd have scientists give, their case and the other case. So David was kind enough to say yes to this notion. We arranged this in like 4 days, just through emails, and things don't normally happen that quickly. So I'm so thankful to David for that. But that's basically what the show is going to be about. But I think that maybe I've been doing a lot of talking here, and, David, you can just give a little bit more about your background if you like, and, where you went to school or whatever you want to say to my listeners. I'm sure your listeners already know.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hopefully both of us have tons of new listeners. And by the way, and thanks, and especially great thanks to Christoph at the Eastern Border. Yeah, he covers an incredible, great range and array of things. I originally came to him when he was before the war. He had excellent history coverage on the interaction between East and West and Eastern Europe. So my, like I said, my company, Living Process LLC, with Greg and Fred over here, livingprocess.net. If anybody is curious, if you want to see the, if you want to see the actual projects and stuff we've done recently, and anyone who's curious and wants to talk about building design stuff with me, we're building designers, that would be fantastic. And where I went to school, I went to the Harvard GSD, got my master's there, graduated 2011, and I've been traveling far too much. My location now, I like being here and want to continue helping people out in this community for decades if I could. So that's what I do. I've been I love ancient history. I also love the esoterica and exotica that has been floating. I get good words for it, maybe, that's been floating around the internet, YouTube, and Twitter. And when was it? How long ago was it that the mud flood stuff has been around, and Tartaria also? When was it that it first crossed your radar?
I first heard of Tartaria concrete probably about a year ago. Former guest of this show, PJ Black, some people might know him from the professional wrestling world. He was a professional wrestler. He was in WWE for 5 years under the name Justin Gabriel, and he introduced me to Tartaria, but he didn't know much about it. He wanted us to look into it. So I did. But it's really new. I've actually contacted a couple of Twitter accounts about it, and it's funny, the ones that have certified accounts on Tartaria, either they're like, I'm not comfortable talking about it, or I'll try to get you someone, and then they disappear, which is sort of like the flat earthers. And that's always, pretty close to a red flag for me. There's not much here, but it's interesting. And I think maybe for the benefit of your audience, and maybe even mine, maybe I should introduce myself, because the strange thing about this show is I don't reveal very much about myself on the show. I think people have picked it up over time as things have been let loose. But my name is Jeff Lippman. I grew up in New York. I went to Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. We called that the Harvard of the South, so that's why I had to get that in. I went to law school at University of Maryland in Baltimore. That's where the professional campuses are. And I've been a practicing lawyer now for 30 years. But I'm also a geek kid. I like Dungeons and Dragons. I like the Jason and the Argonauts movies. Thor was my favorite superhero. Maybe still is. And I remembered Land of the Lost as being something much deeper than it actually turned out to be. And I never really satisfactorily got past page 6 of the Bible, because I was looking at plot holes and wondering, what's this all about? And so this show has been my lazy way of researching everything I'm curious about, without actually lifting a finger myself other than hitting record. So I'm sort of like a lazy intellectual. And the journey has been amazing. And I'm not sure if you were my first guest from Harvard, but the first I remember right now. So that's cool. I have a Harvard person on there. So awesome. This is cool. Right. This is cool too. But yeah, this is, I'm sure it's going to be mostly about debunking. I hear it all the time. We've lost the technology. We could not build what the Aztecs and the Maya and the Olmecs built. We could not build what the Egyptians built. I'm like, is that really true? I'm pretty sure we probably could.
Yeah. The question, the whole thing is that the answer to that, as is usually true with history, is the answer is yes and no at the same time, right? And then the question, but that's not enough. You got to, okay, how yes and how no and what and how and why and et cetera. A little bit without getting too lost. I want to get into the real meat and potatoes of it, but it's kind of the fun, kooky, crazy stuff. We can't ignore that. I first heard about Tartaria when this is going to sound made up, but it's not. It's one of those things. It was probably 2013, around about the same time I was discovering Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He was releasing the amazing podcast of Death Throes of the Republic, which I've listened to like 5 or 6 times all the way through, and it inspired me to do my own podcast, which is still kicking it up and around. But my YouTube stuff is my newest stuff. A History of Architecture is what the podcast is called, if anyone wants that background on me. I had trouble falling asleep in 2013, probably, when I was living in New Jersey, working in Brooklyn. And they were like, back then, before they called it ASMR, they were like whisper channels. And the YouTube algorithm gave me a video on that. That was not intentionally that, but people had been appreciating what they call unintentional ASMR. And there was this Bulgarian woman with a podcast channel, I think you can still find it, called New Earth. And she had this, one could speculate on all kinds of conspiracy theories about who was supporting her to do this and what and why, but maybe that's more fun to speculate than talk about. But she would go on and on about, and she would talk about, she had this very precise kind of accent, and would talk about the survivor empire. In the so-called Roman Empire was actually no evidence for this, but the survivors of Great Tartaria were able to, and she'd go on and on about this, and so it was very speculative and very up in the air. And I looked at it, and then, there's that, and the idea of Tartaria, to define it, is that pretty much the debunk of that is that in the 16-ish, 17-ish hundreds, there were old maps, and instead of saying Mongol whatever, or I guess what were they called, the Golden Horde, or the Empire of Timur the Lame, they would write, to make it really simple, because the Western European guys weren't all that interested, and they didn't know that much, they just had a big kind of shaded area on the map, and they wrote Tartaria, because that's what you called guys on horsebacks, like it's in Shakespeare plays. Guys on horsebacks with really strong bows, you called Tatars. And there's even Tatars in Crimea and all that. So, but then for some reason, a kind of Russian nationalist sentiment seized upon this, and it fused and it mutated with the whole Carolingian missing time theory, which is another weird flat earth style thing. And then I don't know how it got associated with mud flood. Maybe we can blame New Earth Lady for this by mentioning it in the same episode, which she might have done. But the mud flood stuff, I lived in Chicago and miss it dearly, and I lived in Chicago for many years, and so I knew what was actually going on with a lot of this, is that these people who would, sometimes a little bit of learning is a dangerous thing, sometimes a little bit of learning is an exciting or an embarrassing thing at the same time. But there are buildings. There are buildings that when they're getting renovated or even work done on the street, you have half of it covered or more.
Right.
In Chicago specifically, and I'm sure also in many places across the South, I've seen photos across the South of this, any place that, like Chicago, had actual mud, real mud streets, and then they laid down sewer tracks, and then they laid paving above it. This covered up half the houses. And they did this on purpose so that you could get plumbing in all the houses, and it was actually cheaper to do it that way in the 19th century than it was to excavate and cut and dig the way they do today. Because, modern, I was going to say steam shovels, modern excavating equipment is a real kind of miracle in some ways, and it made it a lot cheaper to excavate. So that change in technology is part of why we now excavate sewage tunnels instead of laying this stuff on top. That has a lot to do with the mud flood thing. There are actual real floods that real science has been discovering, and people like Randall Carlson and even Graham Hancock with his fabulism that sometimes goes too far, but like a certain percentage of the time, Graham Hancock is actually on about correct and fascinating stuff.
Sure.
And he's a good enough guy to admit when he's been debunked, when he thinks he has been, and his stuff has changed over time, but it's pointed to stuff that we now know more about how the Ice Age ended. That it's way cooler. Like, I remember being a young boy in the 80s, and all the books said we had absolutely no idea why the dinosaurs died, and then Chicxulub became common knowledge. And we're going through a similar transition with the Ice Age, with all this fascinating, interesting stuff, and the really interesting thing is that there was human culture. Right. At that time, there were utter geniuses with quartz, clear quartz spearhead tools, and the Clovis points and everything in North America. And you know what? Yeah, the clock did get set back 5,000 years on that civilization. People joke kind of half seriously about that if that comet hadn't hit us, the North American civilization would have been on the moon at the time the Great Pyramids were being built, if you think about it that way.
Yeah, you could.
In terms of technology that we lost, the other thing is that we could build this stuff today. We don't want to because it's not economically. There's no economic incentive or spiritual incentive that drives the economic incentive. There was a fantastic guy who was a great influence on me in terms of lecturing and history, Eugene Weber. You can find his stuff on YouTube with the Western tradition. Eugene Weber's fantastic. And he once said, and he went through 52 episodes going through all known recorded Western history. Great. And one of the things that he said about the Middle Ages is he said, it's important for us to remember that there was more stone quarried, dressed, and built in the years of Gothic France. Not just all of France, Gothic France. This is the kind of the high Middle Ages, between 1000 and 1400. In those years, those few centuries, there was more stone quarried, designed, built, put into the cathedrals by volume of stone than in all of Old Kingdom Egypt.
Wow.
That's impressive.
It sure is.
Now, does that mean that we have lost? Now, also, Herodotus, the whole idea about the pyramid being built in 20 years, I want to debunk that, because that's probably bunk. The Great Pyramid was probably built in phases. The whole 20-year thing is treated like gospel truth. That's actually hearsay from Herodotus. Right. Herodotus's tour guides in Egypt said, oh yeah, that was probably built during the reign of Khufu. You figure out Khufu's reign is 20 years, they assume it was built in 20 years. If you look at it from an engineering perspective, it's very likely, we don't know how, it's very likely that it was built in phases, possibly spread out over centuries or longer. Technology that we've lost, that's real, is I've been to the Largo Museum. I worked for 2-ish years in Lima, Peru, and the Largo Museum in Lima is, I would say it's the best part of Lima. I'm not a huge Lima fan, but the Largo Museum is fantastic, and it's from a guy who started excavating his own garden and finding old pottery that no one cared about in like the 19-teens and the 1920s, and he made his mansion there a museum. And it has been one of the best museums in the world for ancient South American pre-Columbian stuff. One of the things that's fun that they have there is about the chicken DNA question. Where are the chickens from?
Right.
The DNA is ambiguous. The chickens might have come from the Spanish. The chickens might have come from Southeast Asia and the Polynesians on boats, like Moana.
That's great.
Right? The DNA is ambiguous. The art evidence, they have sculptures that look like chickens that are definitely pre-Columbian. So I think that somehow chickens came across the Pacific, but that's beside the point. On the technology, we know that the Mayans had concrete that was better than the Romans, that we still had not reverse engineered the chemistry of. The Inca had gold plate. It's something that drove the Spanish crazy, is that the Incas didn't make stuff out of solid gold. The Incas liked doing gold plate. because you get more of it.
Right.
They weren't selling it as solid gold. They wanted it to be beautiful, ceremonial, religious stuff because it was like the sun and it was important to them. They only did gold plate. The Spanish made their money out of silver. They were like kind of upset maybe that they saw so much gold, but there wasn't that much there. Silver did it for them during all the Phillips. And we still don't know how they did it. They had this amazing gold plate chemistry that we still haven't figured out. There's good speculation that they also had some type of hydrochloric acid derivative that I wish I could remember. I looked up in one of my spare time to see, is there some type of plant that if you make a toxic tea out of it and boil the heck out of it, that it gets acidic? Yeah, there is. There's plants that the Incans could have had that they boil and boil and boil and boil and boil, and then it turns into hydrochloric acid that's strong enough that you could fizzle out limestone. Guess what? That stuff that looks like it's kind of melty on the outside with those bricks, that stuff that's limestone like that, if they put that paste on there and use leather gloves so you don't burn your hands and get a chemical burn, you put that on there and you swing and rub the rocks together and it kind of fizzles out the edges and the limestone dissolves. That's quite possibly how they did whatever you call it, Ben from Uncharted X with this Hanan Pacha and the ramparts in Cuzco. So it's kind of fun, but also kind of frustrating that there's all this speculation about saying, oh, we could never do it. The attitude of we could never do it is kind of an insult to both us and them, like they were somehow magic people and we're stupid, which is insulting both ways, I guess. But there's really fascinating stuff that's totally possible, but a lot of what gets talked about is just kind of silliness.
Okay. Well, there's a lot there. I had Andy from the History of Africa on a few times. And one of the first shows he did, he talked about the pyramids as well. He's like, no, people made that and they made it by trial and error. And you can tell because there's lots of smaller pyramids and there's lots of pyramids that weren't completed because they fell down. And so you can see them learning how to do it. Someone who, I forget his host, Kris, I think is his name also, from the History of China, somebody posted, what is there's a huge compound in China. It's not Angkor Wat, obviously, but it's sort of the Chinese equivalent of that. In any event, the name doesn't matter. I wish I could remember it. But somebody said, it's impossible for anyone to have built, any humans to have built it. It was a miracle. And he's like, well, it did take them 600 years. So maybe it was the Great Wall of China. I don't know. But whatever it was, people were acting like they built it. Sort of like you were saying about Khufu, 20 years. This myth that it took 20 years. And he's like, no, it took 600 years to do it. So there's, our measurement of time is different in, our level of patience. And anyone who doesn't, even if you're 40 years old or younger and you've seen movies from the 1980s, if you try and watch E.T. or Terminator right now, you're going to go crazy with boredom because it takes forever to start based on movies today that everything starts right away and goes straight into Fast and Furious mode. Just imagine, eras without any sort of built-in entertainment, at fingertips. The level of patience is different. If a voyage took 3 months on a steamship, or it took 3 weeks on a steamship versus 3 months on a Cutty Sark or whatever, or a man of war, that was considered an immense achievement. And in fact, it was. Now, for us, if the flight takes more than 4 hours, we're pissed off. So, we value time differently because of technology, but I think that plays into it a lot. And people try to, shoehorn or retrofit whatever time stamps they want. And it's almost impossible to disprove these things because my understanding is that carbon dating has some serious limitations and something has to be and you have to be like underground and be able to see certain hallmarks of the leveling. Like measuring ground isn't always exactly the way to do it. There needs to be certain levels. Like I know in Rome, there's levels where there's like a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of ash, and they know that was from Pompeii or something like that. So there are hallmarks until you get into like different layers of geology.
It's absolutely, it's fascinating. In Italy, I was honored enough to spend some time working there. I was in Sorrento, working with the Museo di Intarsia di Legno, with Alessandro Fiorentino, the architect there, in the Museum of Wood Inlay, and there are cafes. There's a trattoria in Piano di Sorrento where you can go, and they will have places that are. It's really hard to build places sometimes in some of those cities that aren't straight into a hill, because they got the cliffside on the ocean. The hills go up, and then the hills are made out of volcanic tuff, out of the stone that's hardened from the several eruptions, and you can actually see the layers when you go to the back of the restaurant, or if you sit in the basement and walk down the stairs, you'll see the stratigraphy there, and it does. I was always curious. Well, was one of those layers from Pompeii? Well, that's possible, but that's just part of daily life there. And carbon dating, and you can see like chunks of petrified wood in there, or wood that's not yet petrified. Carbon dating is fantastic. The decay of radiocarbon 14, the half-life of it. So it was a miracle when that was discovered, and we can date things like bones and especially teeth. That preserves the carbon, but after a while, it completely decays in its half-life to where the signal is not discernible. I forget how many thousands of years it is, but it gets less accurate as you go back. Also, it's not a perfectly steady decay. And the research about the Ice Age has thrown light on this, because roundabout at certain points, the amount, as far as they can tell, the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere went absolutely haywire bonkers. I think the reasonable speculation for that is because of asteroid impact or comet impact. We're introducing new carbon-14 into the atmosphere, which then settles and goes into the plants, it goes into the plant eaters, it goes into the meat eaters, etc. And that's why the more sophisticated stuff, maybe they started doing this in the 70s with the dendrochronological calibration, is that if they looked at tree ring data and chronology from tree ring data from a known tree and a known piece of wood, and because you can see from the thickness of the rings the pattern of the years from the precipitation, they used that to calibrate it, and they found this came into play with the controversial dating of a place which I think is not Atlantis, with Santorini. Because that's a good point that I'm remembering here. It doesn't have to you don't have to have an asteroid impact to screw up your carbon-14.
Right.
You can have a volcano. So that's why dendrochronology and all these specializations are so important, that they talk to each other. And that's, for example, anyone who's curious about if there was an exodus, how many exoduses and when did they happen, the explosion of Santorini, and when did that happen, and we're still not sure. That's all part of answering those puzzles.
Yeah, we've had Ralph Ellis on the show, and we did it. His topic was so large, we gave him 2 episodes back to back. He's fascinating. Right, I did one right before New Year's and one right after New Year's to give you some doom in the beginning and give you some doom at the end, or vice versa, rather. But he thinks Atlantis was Santorini. I personally don't, and that's not even important. But he definitely ties in the eruption to one of the exoduses, and he believes that there were at least 2. Meanwhile, there's really no archaeological or anthropological there's no evidence of any sort of an exodus of people of 100,000, a nation of 100,000 or more, being in the Sinai for any amount of time, let alone 40 years.
There's not that. There is not that. I have some sympathy. With Ralph Ellis's hypotheses. I think he's one of those guys where he's so outrageous. Ralph Ellis loves. I'm going to say this, and Ralph, I love you if you're listening. I hope you're listening.
I hope so too.
Ralph Ellis. Sometimes like Ralph Ellis and Graham Hancock, I put in the same category. That when there's a weakness to their arguments, it's because they love awesome too much. And they'll research the awesome, and sometimes their awesome has a lot of substance behind it, and sometimes the awesome is on a little bit of thin ice. His Santorini Atlantis, I would disagree with. I think his perspective on the Exodus seas, he argues, is pretty interesting. You're right. You're right with the no evidence of quite a lot of people in the desert. Ralph Ellis would counter that to say it wasn't necessarily a lot of people in the desert. However, he goes into the details of that without getting into a huge Ralph Ellis thread, which is totally possible. But there's, in terms of linguistic evidence, Ralph Ellis does fascinating work looking at the King's lists and finding homologies,
yes.
Which, if people want to listen to your stuff, Ralph Ellis probably went over that. But with the Davidic line and the idea that, okay, the Southern Kingdom was, and this is the thing that gets people like Zahi Hawass very paranoid when they do crazy things like call, what's his name, Robert Bouval. He calls a Belgian guy of mixed Romanian, I forget Robert Bouval's complex ancestry, but he calls Robert Bouval a Zionist because he's nervous. Well, he shouldn't be nervous. I don't think there's anything to be nervous about, but maybe I can understand why he's nervous when Ralph Ellis talks about, the Southern Kingdom of Judea. Yeah, that was also, dynasty, colony. The minimalists would say that, Judea was only Judea at that time was a colony of Egypt. Ralph Ellis would say, yeah, it was. And the people who later said that they were kings of Jerusalem counted their line back to what used to be a capital in Avaris or Tanis or whatever. So I think that's fascinating. And then there's a little bit, I may as well share this because when else can I talk about this with anybody who cares? I have annoyed rabbis with my interest in history. I have to find ones that have time. But there's a bit in Psalms, there's a bit in Psalmic prayers that get read very, very regularly often. And being aware of some of this history, having that cross my eye, it's, there's, I forget exactly what and where it is, but it talks about, the great Lord, King of the universe, who from Zion, who dwells in Jerusalem. And I thought that's a very remarkable phraseology, from Zion, who dwells in Jerusalem. It might be that they're saying, well, Mount Zion in Jerusalem, God comes from Zion and dwells in Jerusalem. That could make sense, but it still seems weird. What makes it seem less weird to me is if the Zion that they're meaning there, that's a pun, that Ralph Ellis talks about, this Zion and Zoan. This might be a recovery of an Egyptian thing, and but I think this is very fascinating, and this gets into a whole other topic. But there's stuff like the seal. It's either Josiah or Hezekiah. I get them mixed up like Keats and Shelley. But there's the great seal of one of them has it has an Aten disc on it.
Right.
And then you think about what Ralph Ellis says about Adonai. There are these, and it's been well attested that there are linguistic influences from the north and from the south.
Right.
On the ancient scriptures, but there's, however the Exodus happened, if it happened,
and the East,
undeniable. and there, it's undeniable that there is this Egyptian connection.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, Egypt was one of the largest players back there, along with Babylon, and of course Rome. And people forget about the Axumites, who were big players in their time as well, and some of that overlapped. But yeah, Ralph is definitely very large on phonetic similarities as being proof. It's interesting, and he can back up a lot of things, and he can weave very interesting stories and tales. I'm just not ready to say that they're all history. I'm not ready to say that they're all wrong either. I had another guest on who explained that in the times when people were writing the Bible and all the revisions, and basically what probably ended up being 700 years before they started writing the Old Testament and finished up with the New Testament, that 40 basically just meant a long time. So 40 days in the desert for Jesus wasn't really 40 days. It was a long time. 40 years in the Sinai desert wasn't really 40 years. It's just like it was a really long time that they were there.
Interesting.
And I think according to Ralph, they probably weren't there nearly that long. They crossed into, and they got into Jericho, and And there's a little bit of a plot hole there, too, because if you believe the story of Og of Bashan, Moses killed Og of Bashan, but Og of Bashan was in Canaan, which was basically everything from northern Syria down to where Israel meets the Sinai. And so Moses, who never crossed into the land of Israel, somehow led a large war where they killed 100,000 Canaanites in Jericho and Og of Bashan. So Moses had to get into the Holy Land. See, these are one of those plot holes that led me to, on this journey. But obviously, we could talk forever and about all of these things. But I want to try to stick to the debunking of the architecture and
absolutely
this whole thing of Tartaria. I mean, really just took me by surprise because it seemed like it was basically some, like an Asian version of Atlantis, but it was so much bigger, and people were saying so much about technology, almost like it was Wakanda. Out there. Now, we've got the steppes and winter and all that, and yes, it's probably a hard place to excavate, but it probably also, there'd be signs of that. And I know that there's a tribe called the Tatars, or that somebody, or maybe it was an acronym that other people called them the Tatars. I don't know which. I don't know which is the chicken or the egg. But when I was young, that's one of the tribes I learned. The Magyars, the Tatars, the Mongols, and then you learn about the Pachiniks and the Parthians and the Chaldeans and the various Turkish peoples and Iranic peoples and the Scythians and all that. And it's all never-ending fun, and probably none of it was fun in real life because there were probably swarms of different horsemen, raining down on you with arrows. And they were probably being chased by different swarms of horsemen raining down on them with arrows. I don't want to get into the question of indigeny because it's a never-ending thing. I just say that I don't think anybody chose to live above the Arctic Circle. At some point 8,000 years ago, or whatever, they figured
Hyperborea.
Yeah, well, we can make.
This is my theory about Hyperborea. I think that it's quite possible that Hyperborea is a memory not of the Arctic Circle, but a memory of the receding Alpine and Carpathian glaciers. And that north of those, there was a developed culture of red-headed Celtic people. That might be the productive angle there.
Yeah, no, it could be. I mean, I've heard people say Ultima Thule was Ireland. I've heard them say it was Iceland. More likely, it was just a placeholder, like Atlantis. Not necessarily a place, not necessarily not a place, but just an archetype of a memory of a culture of people who at some point were scarier than the people that you were, whoever you were, familiar with. And then all legends grow larger. That's sort of almost the definition of legend. But Hyperborea is another one that can't put my finger on. I had a couple shows on Atlantis, and I know that there was some, in one legend, the Atlanteans came from Hyperborea. In another legend, they lost a war to a power to the east before losing a war. That's the thing about Atlantis. Everyone's like, the Atlanteans, they knew this, that, and the other thing. Well, even if you take the story of Atlantis to be exactly 100% true, all we know about them is that they seem to be great at everything else but stunk at warfare, because they lost to a power to the east, and then they lost to the Athenians, who they taught everything to. So, I mean, it seems like it was a much different technological gap than, say, the British losing to the 13 colonies.
It might be. I mean, Atlantis. Boy, we could dwell on Atlantis is like Russian dolls with hyperlinks of debunking. It's there's a lot to go through. I can be upfront about my own belief and speculation on Atlantis is that I tend to favor the Azores hypothesis. One thing that's very compelling about that there was something out there, is that they have tilty pyramids.
Mm-hmm.
They have step-back tilted pyramids, and for people who have cleared a field, and the typical conventional hypothesis is that, well, those were Portuguese farmers who were clearing their fields. I doubt that farmers or people who have done farm work came up with that hypothesis. If you're clearing fields of fieldstone, and those stones are roughly the right size that you have to do that, and you throw them out in front of you and make piles, that would be a pretty unique culture that would not only stack their cleared field stones, not into walls like most normal people, but they would put it into a pyramid, and then they would tilt the pyramid somehow to make a point or to keep the rain off. I don't know. What seems more likely to me is that back when we know that there were seafaring people in the Bay of Biscay. There's something called the Solutrean hypothesis from Dennis Stanford, either Sanford or Stanford. He's had trouble getting his ideas out there because people strongly disagree with him. I think he's onto something. He's a guy who did a lot of archaeology. He's put in his dues. He's done archaeology in Siberia. And then he also did a lot of archaeology in Delaware Bay and the Delmarva Peninsula, where a lot of the Clovis and pre-Clovis stuff is. Clovis is not centered where it was discovered in New Mexico.
Right.
The Clovis culture is centered in the Northeast. And back then, the Gulf Stream was a little bit different. The Gulf Stream did swing out and around the Azores. It was quite possible that you would get stuck and or on purpose in your little boat, get swept out to Azores that were a big landmass back then. The Solutrean, morphologically, by the shape of them, the Solutrean leaf points are very much related to the older Clovis and slightly pre-Clovis stuff that you find in Delaware. There's good reason, and again, we don't know, but there's very good reason to believe, and this getting speculating even more, but I think there's something to the haplogroup X thing, where there's DNA, but that's common. And now either these people came through Siberia out of one little dot in the Altai Mountains and left no tracks across the rest of Siberia or the rest of Alaska and everything into like the Cherokee and the Algonquin and whoever has a haplogroup X. Or the people with haplogroup X among the Basque and the Bay of Biscay came across through the Azores, also hunting seals on the ice sheet, got their Churton Labrador, which we know they carried from that down to around Massachusetts. That's possible. So I think that the Atlantis myth may cover Azores stuff. It's very popular to talk about the Eye of the Recot structure.
Yes.
That's another awesome research with Jimmy. Bright insight. Fun, great observations and work. And I think there's weird stuff that's been happening there. And maybe that influenced the myth of Atlantis. But I still have yet to see evidence of anything that was ancient that was there.
Well, they could have been related. I mean, it could be a false choice. I mean, the water levels were lower. There could have been a land bridge or a series of islands that are not islands now. And Atlantis, if it was a continent, it would have multiple cities with different purposes and different looks. Or you could have a continent called Atlantis where they called their capital city Atlantis. I mean, in New York, they call it New York, New York. Now, it's not the capital, it's Albany, but there are places where, the name of the city and the name of the country or continent could well be the same. I mean, it's
Ciudad de Mexico. It's
exactly.
People do it.
It's easy. It makes sense. So I find that very interesting. The Recot structure, it looks like someone took a giant Phillips head screwdriver into the earth, and I would just call it a quarry if it wasn't something like 25 miles in diameter or 25 kilometers in diameter. So the scientific explanation I heard is that when whatever that part of a planet that basically went into the Earth's core and expelled the moon, dug into the Earth, that was a point of insertion. It just seems like a very symmetrical, surgical point of insertion for a planetary event, especially when the planet wasn't really that hardened yet. I don't know enough about this stuff, but it's a very interesting.
Possible.
Yeah, it's a very. Go ahead.
Okay, the latency. It's a skill to deal with. The Recot. It's possible that however many billion years ago that the moon formation was happening, it's possible that the recot is a scar of that impact, and that the recot itself would not have been formed, but a weak point in the crust persisted, which through periodic, and geologists still have no certain idea of how that darn thing was formed, but a weak point in the crust from some type of moon-style impact separation thing. You could get concentric circles. You would have a weak point from the impact, and then the concentric circles come from the repeated lava dome, pyroclastic flow, whatever you call it, and then...
you can call it whatever you want. I won't know the difference. Pyroclastic flow? I agree.
So what do you think? What do you think about to debunk on a type of building thing or an architecture thing? What else is on your mind for debunking?
Well, I mean, we've got things like Machu Picchu. We have Angkor Wat. There's the I don't even know the names of the places. But you see the beautiful photos of these temples and cities built into the sides of mountains. You've got even the simple structures of like the Hopi Indians in the Southwest, how they get up there and build that, the Nazca lines, how they get up there and do all that. But much of this might be answered by a simple question. So what the big question out there is, everyone say, how did they get these gigantic rocks and move them, period, and get them so orderly and have the rocks together so tightly and perfectly cut without any power tools and lasers and things like that? And maybe Occam's razor tells you if everyone did it, maybe it's not as hard as we thought it was to actually do it. You just needed to have, enough people at spear point and enough time. But Occam's razor could also say, oh yeah, well, gods came down and did it, or aliens came down and did it. That's the other side of Occam's razor. So maybe you have an answer for megalithic structures and construction generally.
Yeah, I have my own speculative answer about the why of megalithic stuff, because we could see that as the Bronze Age, the Chalcolithic, and then the Bronze, and then the Iron Age happened, where you go copper, hardened copper, bronze, brass, iron, the bricks got smaller. And I haven't heard anyone talk or give an explanation as to why, except that old stuff equals amazing and newer stuff is kind of not as great. But if you think about how the cutting material works, and this is, I'm coming from a building and a design perspective on this, is that the bigger your stones, the less cuts you're making. And I think that's the answer for megaliths right there, of the why, one of the part of the answer of why. Obviously, I think there's a spiritual part, and you can even you can feel this today. In many places, especially a place like Stonehenge or the Menhirs in France, you can get a feeling as to why. And I think this is very important. I think we're rediscovering this, by the way. I should throw out there that I've been shopping around this idea that I would love to discover, and maybe even to work out to build the idea of, I think our culture is moving towards the fun thing of a project for a temple of a religion that does not yet exist.
I'm listening.
That there's some kind of spiritual understanding that we're moving towards, and this religions change. There are new religions. And the religions that have lasted over civilizational breaks and changes, and there are some of them around today that have been around for a few thousand years, and they have the things that are still ancient and still the same things, and there are the things that are very different. And one of the things that are very significantly different is how the religious architecture is done. And I think it's appropriate. The Egyptians, with their miraculous sense of history, which the Greeks and Romans did not have, the Egyptians would deliberately have some appreciation of this. I think because their oral tradition, I have good evidence, by the way, that their oral tradition does go back reliably 30,000 years. Mm-hmm. I was drafting this is still when I was in Lima, in my spare time, like in the evening when I was done with work, I would open up AutoCAD, and just for fun, because you can zoom in and out of it, I'd make a historical timeline. And I could zoom way out and get geological timeline, zoom way in and see like Akhenaten, and then later on up there, the reign of the Romans and the fall of the Roman Republic. And then I thought, well, what happens when I put the kings lists in there? I put in the various kings list, the Turin kings list, and all this.
Right.
And there was one kings list, and there are various Zeptepes, various first times in Egypt. And the one that goes way back, there's one that goes way back to 30,000 BC. And then my jaw almost fell off my face. I realized that this kings list, one of the kings list out of Manetho, which I would say is likely to be, with his scholarship and his access to the documents in the Library of Alexandria, probably the more rigorous kings list. So Manetho's kings list goes back, and you could tell the memory fades like it would with oral tradition. He goes into kings, and then he goes into dynasties, and then he goes into the length of the kingdoms. This is rational. If he was totally faking it, he'd probably have individual kings all the way back. He doesn't. So that's some verisimilitude there. And then the very beginning where he said the Zeptepi became, and the land of Egypt emerged from the stormy waters, the chaotic waters, that happened exactly with the end of a geological period called the Mousterian Pluvial.
Okay.
And I thought, whoa, okay, it's very likely that the Egyptians were preserving with their oral and maybe their sculptural. Because Herodotus, again, talks about how the Egyptians, if you read the Herodotus carefully, he talks about, this is Plato. This is Plato because he's talking about Solon. When Solon went to the temple at Sais, which they acknowledged that Athena came from Egypt, that they preserved the memory of the generations by the statues of priests. And they memorialized it that way, and so they were able to get a good idea. And this is probably, with these long memories, you can understand how the Egyptians astronomically had a sense of precession of the equinoxes, because they were observing stellar things for a long time.
Right.
You don't need the telescopes. You don't need aliens to do any of that. Again, like you were saying, time will give you those answers, time and consistency. And in Egypt and in the Sahara, which we knew they were in the Green Sahara, and then the pharaonic culture came east as it dried up. What's it called? Nabta Playa shows us this. It's the Egyptian Stonehenge. So they were, that Egypt did come out of the stormy waters at that time. And so the megaliths, back to the megaliths, that as you go in your technology to a sharper edge that lasts longer, it's easier to make more cuts.
Right.
So you get smaller bricks, you get bricks of a custom shape and everything. And the older the technology is, if you're cutting in flint, you can do that. And then there's the whole thing about the power tools and everything. Now, my combination of yes and no on that, I think they did have power tools. I made a video of it. They didn't have, I don't think they had electricity. I think they had power tools, but they did not have electricity. But we know how that works because the medieval era had power tools without electricity. It was called a spinning wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was called a jigsaw jenny. That you have a foot reel, and you have you have something with an inertial wheel principle. If you can get inertial wheels and reciprocation, or inertial wheels and rotating, you are off to the technological races.
Well, and also water. Couldn't you do it like a mill?
Yes, you definitely can do a mill. And guess what? The Egyptians, we think the Egyptians weren't hydrological engineers. We know they were. Johanna James, I made my video about a drill. I made a model of one. I made a little drill with a piece of flint that I put on it just for fun, and I drilled with my colleague Brian. I drilled a piece of soap. It's on my YouTube channel. We throw a big lump of wax as a weight over our balcony, and then the drill spins, and it works. So that happened. There's a guy that Johanna James met on one of her recent videos, an English guy who's an engineer who was also thinking about the Jed principle of rotating and inertia and about those Jed pillars. And he made really cool models that you see how it works on her video about how if you use, you can make a gear train, you can make it like a bicycle gear situation. And to your question earlier, how did they pull the rocks? Well, the Egyptians didn't have block and tackle like the Romans did, that we have evidence of, but we have iconographic evidence of jeds everywhere, and the word jed means enduring power. So doesn't that make you think about inertial wheels? Also, the fact that you could use it as a pulley system, yeah, that might have been part of it. There's, to get a little bit further out on the speculation that could be real, is not acoustic levitation necessarily, but acoustic friction reduction.
Okay.
If you get loud enough sounds, which is possible, then on a low, that have low order harmonics, and you get that thing loud enough, which you could conceivably do with lots of people with trumpet style things. This also makes you think about Jericho and everything, and what's happening there.
Yeah, you just read my mind, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's possible that they would have had the track with the rock, and you get either the track or the rock to vibrate, and when you hit the right frequency, you will drastically reduce the friction.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, that is amazing. So the pyramids, not batteries, no ley lines. We haven't lost the ability to levitate things, but the sound and resonance, there's something to it in that the with a certain resonance you can you're greasing it without grease.
Yeah, or like turning regular grease into super grease.
Ooh,
yeah. And there's a lot of stuff with that. I think that and for whatever reason, this is more on the metaphysical side that I think always impacts design and people's motivations in fun and important ways with cultural cohesion, because, heaven knows we could use some cultural cohesion lately.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, I don't think it's an accident that there's a revival of interest in Egyptian stuff, because Vasily Kandinsky wrote about this in a book called On the Spiritual in Art. And I did a whole thing about it on my podcast years ago, and that I have several episodes covering that. And one of the things he says in there is that there are periods in history where we have a sense of understanding or not understanding something in the past. And then when our culture changes, the kind of past culture that we have a fascination with makes sense that would also shift. So for whatever reason, and then like what we've, I won't get into the theory on this, but that could be for later. But that's all Spengler stuff. But the Oswald Spengler, Decline of the West. But the Greeks and Romans for a long time, for a little bit more than 1,000 years, have been the constructive opposite of Western thinking, of Western mathematical construction. My speculation now is that whatever mathematics is changing into, when it started to change in the late 19th century with the non-Euclidean geometry and then special relativity, and we're thinking differently, and our technology lets us think, that intensifies how we can think differently. So, and our artistic sensibilities, we're more fascinated by the Egyptian stuff, because before Napoleon, and especially before the 1920s, no one really cared so much. That's why all those discoveries were made, and all that stuff was there. They could have found King Tut's tomb, but there was money to look for it, desire to look for it in the 1920s, and they found it, and then that just amplifies it. I don't think this is, when you get enough, as Beauval said, when you get enough pigeons on a table, it stops being a coincidence.
Right.
There starts being a reason. I think part of the reason for this fascination with ancient stuff in general, and the Egyptian stuff specifically, is we are reawakening or reconnecting to a spiritually meaningful understanding about how we feel about how the earth and sky move, and how we feel about that, and how there are genuine changes to stuff like that. And I think that a sense of and this is Spengler very briefly, the mathematical construction that has governed the West has been XYZ axis in infinite space. And even if you haven't heard about that before, you stop and think about it for a minute and it makes sense. And in the Eastern kind of Orthodox Christian, rabbinical Judaism, and Islam cultures all together back there, he called that one way of mathematical thinking, which I think makes sense.
Yes.
And in that way of mathematical thinking, there was like the algebra. There was the sense of the dome of the heavens, the dome of the sacred building, balance,
right,
microcosm, macrocosm. Yeah, and so that's a different. That's one reason he says that's why the Arabs invented algebra, and then the Westerners invented calculus, because it came out of it. That makes sense. Well, we've shifted. I think we're far enough along that we're starting to shift into a thing that we don't fully understand yet, but it's interesting to me. I would agree with those theories that all art is born religious, and some of the ideas of sacred architecture is a big part of that. And for whatever reason, I think the sense of acoustics, sound, reciprocation, I think this is where a lot of spiritual innovation, that used to be a dirty word, spiritual innovation, the spiritual innovation and technological innovation can come from.
Yeah, I mean, sound is energy. There's no denying that. Sound has matter. Sound has force. So, I mean, anyone who's ever lived near where the Concorde used to fly remembers it. I did. Right on the approach. So, and the both egress and ingress. Back when there was both British Airways and Air France running the Concorde. Yeah, that was all Kennedy Airport, and I was right there in the flight zone. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, there was just a sonic boom in DC when they scrambled a F-22 or something because of an unauthorized, and there was a sonic boom that terrified people. I mean, sound has force, so if somebody used that to harness, and if that's what they were able to do, that would be a technology that the theory of divergence is that, these things sort of spread one way or another through trade, commerce, whatever it is. But yeah, it is really fascinating. I don't want to list particular places because I think it'll drive mad. I think that the concepts that you espouse were probably apply in some way, shape, or form to all of them. But if there's anything in particular that you want to debunk, I think this is a free debunk zone.
Yeah, what drives me nuts that should be debunked? That's a fun question. I would...
And I'll let you
covered several of them already. There's Santorini, there's the Dendera light bulb.
Okay.
Let's do. Other people have covered this really well. It's not like I'm giving any new news. But yeah, the Dendera light bulb. So these are related. There's the Dendera light bulb, and this might be a Dendera and it might not be, but there's the spaceship hieroglyphs.
Yes.
It looks like Luke Skywalker's hover speeder.
Right.
It actually does. But I can't debunk that Akhenaten looks like Obama, because that's a fact. He does look like Obama.
Okay.
But I have no theory about that. But anyways, those two things.
I have a theory on that. Sometimes people resemble each other.
That's right. There we go.
I mean, I look like Kevin James. I mean,
So the hieroglyphs. And again, this is the thing. What frustrates me about this is that the fake awesome distracts from the real awesome.
Mm-hmm, it does.
And fake awesome might be good for fiction, but I'm so much more of a fan of real awesome. That's why I get frustrated by things like the HBO Rome, which was good. But if they had stuck to the plot, if they had stuck to the Plutarch, it could have been great, Anyways,
season 1 was good. I mean, season 2 lost the thread, and season 3 was really bad.
They had money problems, There was budgets to apologize for it a little bit, but yeah, I agree with you mostly. But so those hieroglyphs in the Dendera light bulb, NEXT. On YouTube and also Uncharted X. Both of those guys have good, but NEXT especially because he talks about John Anthony West's scholarship on it from what I think is really great in what they call the Symbolist School of Egypt, out of the scholarship of Schwaller de Lubitsch, J. Schwaller de Lubitsch. It's the Dendera light bulb. I'll get back to the hieroglyphs. The Dendera light bulb is not really a light bulb, and this video is great because they actually, what a lot of the speculators do is they do not read the texts. There's texts all over that stuff, and they can't read it, but I can't read it either. But I like looking up the people who do, and then you can find out, and it's talking about the birth of a king. It's a very Egyptian thing to do, to talk about the birth of a king, and then also to reference as like an echo, a meaningful metaphorical echo, or beyond metaphor. It's like an analogy, I guess, like the birth of the universe. Birth of the king, birth of the universe. Our king is such a powerful king that he preserves order in the universe. That's how they thought. And so it's about honoring that. and it's about divine creative power. The sense of the serpents. That's not a light bulb filament. It's a sense. It is a sense of power, but it probably has. This is my own speculation, but I think there's something to it. It has to do with like a serpent would be to echo Jordan Peterson here, the serpent of chaos, Apep, the primordial serpent. And here, the primordial serpent is kind of straightened out. It's still wavy, but it's straightened out. So you have the kind of void creation coming out of the body of the king. I'll leave it at that for family friendly. It's coming out. They don't talk about it because it's embarrassing. It's coming out of the body of the king.
Got it.
The Egyptians did that on purpose because
a very old
sons.
It'd be a very old picture of you and I. A very old picture.
So that's
it's not the elemental wind symbolism.
The elemental wind.
Mm-hmm. Like sometimes the symbol, like it could be
I haven't heard about that one.
Elemental wind. The four elements, they all have symbology.
Like earth, fire, and water, and wind.
Yep.
Well, that might be the speculation. Part of the speculation, I think that maybe fits with some of the symbolist interpretation.
It's more meta than semen. but it may be less accurate though. But we've seen, the lines, the wave, and yes, you've got the primordial snake, but you also have the snake often goes with water, but when that shape, there's the wind, and then you've got two elements coming, and what else does a creator of a universe and a world do? But make the elements.
Yeah, and the lotus, I think you have all the elements present. That's a very interesting observation. The lotus is coming out of the earth.
So you thought I was your dumb friend here, and I sort of am here, by the way. Freely admitting. But every now and then from the mouths of babes, I have something comes out that makes the show worth it to the guest.
No, the whole thing is great. No, really. It's the... Yes, the Dendera light bulb is way more complex and fascinating than technological light bulbs. The hieroglyphs that they genuinely look like a helicopter or a tank or a Star Wars speeder.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a palimpsest, what they call a palimpsest, an overlaying of two sets of text. It's hieroglyphs where something to do generationally with one of the Ramseses that they were carving over. They were carving over and then doing infill to say the names of the kings. And then eventually the infill fell out, and you get this thing that looks like the thing that was the speeder. Mm-hmm. And for people who aren't on YouTube, they thought my hand makes a good, it's a hand hieroglyph.
Right.
And then stuff falls out, and then what is a hand hieroglyph looks weirdly technological. But that's I get bent out of shape about that sometimes.
Right. Well, there's a lot of those sort of famous, carvings, bas reliefs, whatever. There's the one that looks like a dinosaur, like a brontosaurus in Angkor Wat. There's similar symbology in Mesoamerican temples and pyramids as there are in Babylonian, Sumerian temples. You have birds and similar poses and things like that. And I think those are all remarkable. And there's things that look like they could be spacesuits or deep sea suits, but also there are folks carving into rock, and those just might be easier shapes to do. And it might just be, somebody with a helmet on their head, a war helmet or a ceremonial helmet. I love all the fun stuff too, but I don't find that there's carvings to be all that remarkable, even if they look very similar, because we all did come from some place at one point, and some of those stories and symbologies of the peoples, whatever they were, Homo erectus or Homo sapien, whoever they were, those got carried as people moved, and they got changed. So someplace the fish became more important than the bird. Someplace the bear became more important than the tiger, or whatever the case might be. But are there any things like does that dinosaur in Asia drive you mad?
The Asian dinosaur, that's never bothered me so much. It's something that looks. Is this one the one that looks like a stegosaurus, or is the one that looks like the stegosaurus in Bolivia?
I think that one must be in Bolivia. This one just more looks like almost like a toy brontosaurus. Like when I was a kid and you got the little plastic ones that look more like Dopey from Land of the Lost than, Jurassic Park.
Right, yeah. These days they have their tails carry high and stick out because they got new osteology or something. I'm not familiar with. I don't know about that one. That sounds like a really interesting one. I don't know about that one. There's the Stegosaurus one that I am familiar with. That does kind of bother me. That it looks like because again, there's interesting stuff there. And what is that place? Tiwanaku, I believe it's called. Yeah. Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. The guy who's probably from Greece. Everyone knows him as the aliens guy. I don't want to... Georgios Soukalos, I believe his name is, but he's famous for a picture where he's like, aliens! Oh, right. So he's that guy.
The GIF.
In one of the
I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
In one of the early Ancient Aliens documentaries, which I think was part of popularizing this whole stuff that could be debunked trend, that I wish I could find this because this is such a great clip from him where he almost sounds exactly like Dr. Nick from The Simpsons, and he's saying in Pumapunku, logic does not exist, and it's like, oh, okay, but there's all the things from those episodes, like Ancient Aliens entertains me and upsets me at the same time, which I think the producers were trying to go for that to increase ratings, and well, I'm a sucker for it. And like the stuff about like the little pins that are supposed to be airplanes, that drives me nuts. Yeah, maybe they fly. They're flying fish. They come out of they're moths. They're clearly it's kind of a discredit to that cool culture in Bolivia that made those little, you could tell they're little jewelry pieces that people wear. And then in Pumapunku or Tiwanaku, whatever it is, this is another Graham Hancock speculation that there might be ancient animals on there, that either this is old enough that that's a pre-Ice Age carving, or there were people who remembered, oh yeah, way back when, back in the land of the second sun, we are now in the fourth sun, and back in the land of the second sun, our ancestors, and there are stories. This is the thing that people should do, instead of making Ancient Aliens about this stuff, like actually talk to Native American people and figure out and listen and say, well, what do your traditions actually say? And then there's really amazing stuff, because Randall Carlson talks about in one of his things that in either Georgia or South Carolina, that they had been looking at the Carolina Bay impacts, which are fascinating. And there's a guy, I can't remember his name at the moment, but if you look up Carolina Bays on YouTube, this guy's stuff will come up. He's done really great at scale experiments with taking ice cubes into mud and doing conic section analysis. Really great. But Randall Carlson was looking at Carolina Bays, and there was a lake. There was a lake in one of these, like a lake all by itself, a really elliptical type lake, probably. And they said there was someone, I don't think him, who was studying about this, wondering if it was a meteor impact, perhaps related to the last ice age. And so he went there, and then someone thought, well, are there any? Whoever was researching this asked, are there any Native American tribes that are still here? And said, oh yeah, the such and such place. And, you can go there, and they got a small museum or something. Oh, fantastic! The researcher goes there, and he says, well, hi, I'm researching this, and I'm just around here. And oh, great, thanks for visiting the museum. And he says, well, do you guys have any stories? What are your traditional stories about your origins? And I said, well, our people believe that we've always been here, that we've come from here, and that it was either that or they migrated a long time ago, which I guess would be true of any case. But he said that the name of this place is called that long ago when we first found this place. We found this place because a star fell from the heavens and made the lake. And we call the name of our people means the people are the place of the falling star. Right. And their tribal flag is a shooting star and the lake. Right. So it's like it's there. Right. The stuff. There's so much great stuff to be discovered that to speculate about dinosaurs in Bolivia is just.
The truth is cool enough, and it might be harder to find. in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot to what you were talking about, a new kind of religion that we haven't named yet, which is probably some combination of new and old. And that's probably the subject of another show. And there's lots of reasons for it. I think that there's a lot of people who have not found what they want in traditional religions, and atheism and agnosticism are not particularly satisfying when you see so many people who at least look happier when they're more spiritual. And then also there's the bad rap that ultra-religious people often get from the loudest voices that you see in the media, rarely encounter in real life, but every now and then do. And so, there's tons of, there's always a confluence of events, but I don't know. People ask me, what are you? And at this point I say, well, I'm sort of a dualistic animist. And they're like, what is that? I'm like, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm trying to figure it out. But I think it's a lot closer to what I think it's a lot closer to what a shaman would believe than a priest.
That is amazing. That is actually a really articulate statement of a very interesting religious belief that I've never heard of. And I'll ask a follow-up question. So do you then believe that there are stones with beneficent energy and stones with maleficent energy? It seems like something that a dualist animist might believe, but I don't know if you believe it or not.
I don't know. And that's truth. Okay. I don't know. This is very much a work in progress. This whole show in some ways is my journey. And it doesn't always go in a straight path, which Garden of Doom was an accidental name, but the metaphor of at least being a garden with in my head I see swampy, big, giant roots going in all directions and interweaving, like the tree of life, and that giant that one tree in Utah that's like 250 miles long. If it has one root, that sort of thing. Anyway, wow. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure if I buy yet into rocks, though. Having it, I'm not sure I'm that animist, but I'm not willing to reject it either. So I am agnostic on that. I don't know. I'm not far enough in that. Maybe when I get a geologist who's as spiritual and as knowledgeable history as you are, then I'll have something to ponder on right there. But never did I dream I'd get an architect who would be able to be talking to me about Jordan Peterson and Solon and Herodotus and all these things. So this is beyond my wildest dreams. And where have you been all my life? We've gone 75 minutes. That's probably pretty long for your audience. That's about typical for mine. I want to be respectful of your time. How long does your show normally go?
I would say it usually goes between 45 and an hour and 20. I think this is a perfect time. And yeah, thank you. This has been a tremendously grand discussion, and I'm going to look forward to uploading this. I'm going to blast it out to the communication channels. And what you mentioned about further discussion about spiritual directions and how they manifest in what's built, if you want to do a part 2, I think that might be fun.
I would love to do a part 2. You are welcome back in the Garden of Doom anytime, and we can do it as a sharecast or whatnot. And if you ever invite me onto your shows, I am not intellectually greedy about whose show is what or anything like that, because this really is a journey, and I've given up on becoming the next Joe Rogan a long time ago. So this has been great. Love to. We'll definitely be in touch about that. But anytime I will try to do the best I can to make it happen. And we're both East Coast, so that's working for us.
All right. Well, yes, very good. So well, thank you so much. And be sure everyone to check out Jeff Lippman's show, and maybe you can tell the folks who are listening on my end, where should they find you?
Sure. Thank you very much. Garden of Doom is the feed. You can find it anywhere you can find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, Podbean, you name, probably a bunch of others as well. You can also find it on the PWC and on the Wrestling Soup Network, believe it or not, and on the Hameen Media Group if you want to join any of those platforms. Some are free, some aren't. And I do a whole bunch of other podcasts in my other world, which is pro wrestling. Some of you are laughing at me right now, and you should. You have every right to. But I've been watching it since I'm like 5 years old, so I'm going on 5 decades, and I'm not about to quit anytime soon. You can find my shows there. And on Twitter, I'm at IcarusFellMD. And if you can deal with a lot of wrestling chatter, there's also some things that are interesting, and I love to interact. And I really appreciate being on your show, and I really appreciate you being on my show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and by the way, anyone listening, please like, share, subscribe, and check out Jeff's show and pop him a review about the fun thing that he's doing that helps everybody get going with that. And with me, it's YouTube Living Process Getzin, Getzin. That should pop it up. And if you come straight to me on Twitter at Histovarch, at HISTOFARCH, all my relevant links are in my bio description. And to find out about architecture stuff, livingprocess.net. So yeah, thank you very much. I look forward to continuing.
Likewise. All right, everyone. Thanks. He gave the outro about as good as anyone possibly could. So whatever you're doing for me, do for his show as well. Like, share, subscribe, review, etc. And mostly tell your friends, because there's nothing more important. There's 2 million podcasts out there. And I Googled that once, how many podcasts out there? And they said there's 2 million podcasts at any time. And that might be conservative. So reviews really do help. Thank you so much for being in the Garden of Doom. And thank you so much for being on Living Process as well. I stole your line for you, but someone's got to close this. So I figure I might as well do that, since you did do all the hard work, including whatever that word was on lava levels. Poly, what was it?
Pyroclastic flow, I believe it was.
Pyroclastic flow. My God, that's a word. I need to figure out how to use that in a sentence. So everyone, your homework assignment is figure out how to use that in a sentence. Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are, whenever you are.